Welcome, everyone, to another Fireside Chat with a retail expert. Today, Bennett Morgan, who we'll introduce in just a moment. My name is Caitlin Allen, and I am the Senior Vice President of Market at Simbi. And it is my pleasure to say Bennett Morgan's name again and welcome you to the conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Bennett.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. Bennett, maybe for those in the audience, would you mind briefly introducing your background and yourself,
Sure.
and then we'll dive in?
Sure. I started in the grocery industry years ago at a consulting firm called Boston Consulting Group that I've now rejoined recently as a senior advisor. And in that time, I've spent most of my time in merchandising, but a good amount of time in store operations and supply chain with a company called HEB down in Texas for a number of years, Walmart internationally with China and Japan, Amazon and their grocery business called Amazon Fresh for a couple of years. And most recently was the executive vice president and chief merchandising officer at SpartanNash, which was recently acquired by CNS.
Amazing. Just an incredible resume, Bennett. And we'll get to the piece about why you've joined us and done us the honor of joining Simbi's strategic advisory board later in the conversation. But I thought we could start maybe just to get to know you a little bit personally and zoom out, talk about some of the trends you've been watching and are watching today in retail. Both broadly and as well as specific to data-driven decision making, which I know you care a lot about, and then was thinking we could evolve the conversation from there towards, what is merchandising thinking about today? What are chief merchants thinking about, particularly as it relates to retail's operating model and the way that they collaborate across the ecosystem? That
Perfect,
sounds
Caitlin.
to you perfect. All right. Well, so like you said, Bennett, you have led transformations across many different companies, including Walmart, China, and Japan, and SpartanNash and Amazon Fresh. And you've advised clients at BCG now two times. And I'm curious, just from a personal perspective, what has driven your passion uh, for retail transformation across all of those experiences?
Yeah, I love the consumer orientation, Caitlin. I always have. A lot of us, when we talk about our early jobs in our lives, had the opportunity to work in retail, and I was no different, right? My first job was at Sunglass Hut, and I remember, trying to sell sunglasses, trying to figure out how to sell sunglasses, and you get cool stories doing that. I sold one to a defensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys once that just wanted the darkest sunglasses he could find, but a lot of us start our careers in retail, and I went from there to Abercrombie and Fitch, and I just love that connection between consumers and trying to solve consumers' needs with what retailers can bring. And obviously, the world has changed a lot from there. And I've been lucky in that journey to have worked a lot with food. And food is a place that I really like the intersection of food and retail. I think food and what it brings in terms of, sort of bridging the divide of different cultures and where people come from and letting them come together and build some of that fabric that we really need as a society. And I really like it. And then, of course, there is the actual sustenance part of it also. You've got to eat. And so I spent a number of years doing that. And retail transformation, they're big, complicated, many times businesses have been around for a long time and have a lot of technical debt and things to work through, but they have great cultures and great people. And it's a nonstop, fast-moving place to be. And so I've always enjoyed working in that space.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I guess my first job was filing things for my dad in a doctor's office, but a first paid job was at Starbucks. So in the same camp,
Nice.
and I agree
Great
with
company.
you. It is a good company.
Yeah.
Uh, and you make a really important point about the role that retail plays in all of our lives, whether it's to help us connect with people we love or to eat things, and making sure that those products, whether it's food or other things, get to where they need to be so that we can get them and consume them, enjoy them. It involves a lot of retail execution, operational execution, and that's complex. So I'm curious, you've gravitated towards companies that think a lot about excellence in that area. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way that are important for us to know, both as we think about getting to know you in this conversation and also understanding retail?
Yeah, Caitlin, two topics that I think continue to be top of mind for a lot of folks, and I don't think it's really debatable that they've accelerated significantly.
Yeah.
AI went from being something sort of interesting that we talked about, on a regular basis, and people would say they use AI. Well, that's completely exploded now. I think it's gotten to the point where if you're not talking about AI, then you've got a real issue as a CEO or a board or a company around where you're trying to go. You need to be talking about how AI fits into your strategy, no matter what line of business you're in. And the other one I think is cost pressures and sort of the lingering effects of COVID and sort of the inflation that came out of that continues to be a concern for many folks. That cost pressure that is created has been another really hot topic. And you talked about some of the reorganization, and I think technology is going to lead to some of that also. But I think that thinking about the best way to organize yourself and to get more efficient and effective, those are two really hot topics, I think, Caitlin, that I think have always been important. We've always had to think about them in the industry, but they have gotten a lot more in focus, and I think everywhere, at least in my experience, Caitlin. So I've been back with BCG as a senior advisor now. So I guess it was since the beginning of June. So you've got 4 months or whatever that is, and have had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with a lot of companies, and it's amazing how those two hot topics are really top of mind for folks. So I think the thing that I would say though is the things that you knew way back when at Starbucks, and that I knew at Sunglass Hut way back in the day, that you've got to start with the consumer. And so, yes, there are a lot of really advanced technologies that have changed the world and will continue to change the world. But if you're not being laser focused on those customers and how you're going to make it better for the customer, and I'd say related to that, to the folks that are touching the customer, if you're not laser focused on those things, then I don't think it's going to be hard for you to win. And so you think about some of the great folks that have pioneered in this industry. Think about folks like Sam Walton. Yeah, you can go back and read his book, Made in America, and a lot of those things, they're much harder to execute, obviously. But the ideas that he talked about and what made him such a great retailer, those things haven't changed. The way that you do it might be different. But I think that's a challenge for all of us in the industry, is to figure out how to keep that laser focus that you need to have and find a way to leverage these new technologies that you're trying to figure out to help you do that without kind of losing sight of what the real objective is.
Simple and true and timeless for a reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Bennett. When something you just said is related to a question that I just got from the audience, and it's they're curious to understand if you view the landscape differently now that you're on the advisory side versus when you were in an operator seat. And I realize you're, several months into that engagement at this point in time, but are there any things that come to mind that it might have shifted your perspective?
Um, I think when you're in an operator's role, Caitlin, you know this. There's a lot coming at you, and there are a lot of that sort of thinking about call it scarcity of energy. I guess you could describe it, right? It's not even time. I think it is, how do you manage your energy to show up in the ways that you need to show up, right? And I don't care if you're an individual contributor or if you're leading thousands of people, right? You have to show up either as a team member, a leader, et cetera, to be effective in your role. So I think when you step into an advisory role, you're a little bit removed from some of that. So you can identify with it because the folks that you're talking to and that you're working with, they're in seats like you were in, but you don't have quite the same pressure that they do. And so I think you can see patterns and you can see things that may be a little bit harder to see when you're in the seat. But I also find it's really it can be really challenging because I think all of us kind of you kind of want to roll up your sleeves and just go make it happen, right? And that's not really the role that you're in when you're an advisor, right? So as an advisor, I had I got went through board training, right? And in boards they talk about I think they call it NIFO. Does that sound right, Caitlin? I think it's nose in, fingers out. It's the way that you're supposed to do it.
I've
And
never heard the acronym, but yes, I think that is
yeah, I didn't coin that term, but hopefully I'm getting that right. But the idea is like you don't need somebody in a board position or an advisory position going and doing all of those things. The whole idea is that your nose is in, meaning you know enough about what's going on that you can actually be helpful. But the most important part is that you can set folks up for success. So you've got a lot of experience, you've seen a lot of things. That's great. That doesn't really matter unless you're able to help other folks do their jobs better. And so that's kind of the role I find myself in now.
I love that. And Bennett, you mentioned some of the transformations that you have seen, maybe shifts is a better word, throughout your journey so far. Whether it's globalization, it's the AI, of course, the AI adoption, digital disruption. And I'm curious what you are watching today that you believe might shape the next decade of our industry. And um, what are the influences of having a centralized strategy and local execution in applying some of what's on the cutting edge today?
Yeah, I think if you said AGI or artificial general intelligence, I think a lot of folks will say they thought that was further away.
Right.
And even 2 years ago, we thought that was further away, right? And now I think a lot of folks are saying, well, it's not as far away as we thought it was. And we can see the vast sums of money that are being pumped into those technologies now that are going to radically disrupt a lot of things. I mean, we all saw the Amazon news that came out, I think it was end of last week, about some talking about what the hundreds of thousands of people impacted that work in those warehouses might be as a result of technology. And so I think there's a lot of folks talking about what that's going to look like in the future and how jobs might change. And I think, to your point, that is a real challenge for leaders to navigate that. But I think what I would say is I think the idea of technology replacing, I am generally not optimistic about that. I'm not optimistic, particularly as a strategy, but I also think this is going to be a lot harder than folks think it's going to be. And we've already seen some folks kind of stub their toe where they've leaned into AI and they haven't really been able to show a lot of value for it. And that's where some of these fundamentals that we were talking about earlier start to become important. So if you're not clear on what your process is that you're following, as an example, right? And you're not cleaning up the process, or you have data issues and you're not cleaning up some of the data, which, almost everybody I've worked with, I don't care how big they are, they have data issues that they're trying to sort through. Those things are going to severely limit where you're going to be able to go. So I think the sort of, you think the classic, we're going to map out the process on the board, Caitlin, and we're going to figure out how to improve the process. Again, a lot of the value here comes from those same pieces of work that we were talking about. Now, technology can be an enabler through that, of course. But we've got to go back to some of those fundamentals to be able to tap into the value that we need. I believe a lot more in augmentation, and I think you and I have talked about this a lot in the past too, in terms of what Simbi has been doing and what Simbi continues to focus on in the future. You think about folks and making the work better for those folks. I worked with this woman named Roxanne Orsic years ago at HEB, and Roxanne recently was appointed the president at HEB, which she's a phenomenal woman, and it was a great, I think, great recognition of the work that she's done over time. So Roxanne's record sort of kind of proves itself. I don't need to tell you that Roxanne's great at what she does. But she used to always say when I worked in the store operations group at HEB, she would say, we've got to make the work better. And she wasn't necessarily talking about technology, but that stuck with me. And I got to give Roxanne credit for that. And I think that matters in terms of how you think about whatever it is, right? A lot of us use ChatGPT or other things like ChatGPT, and we're figuring out how to use that in our day-to-day lives, personal lives, professional lives, right? And try and figure out how to augment the things that we're doing. I think that is the challenge for us as, as society and as leaders in this industry, to figure out how to do that really well. But I don't think it should be about, hey, we're going to save a bunch of money and that's all going to drop to the bottom line. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think the right way to think about it is this is going to give us the ability to do things that we weren't able to spend time on or focus on previously that can make the experience better for customers, for associates, et cetera. Things that really do make the work better, make people's lives better.
Their salient point, Bennett, and I'd love to dig more into that the process that you're talking about of how do you get data ready for driving actual decision making, because then and there's decision making of around the current status or even kind of lagging indicators or what's already happened, and then there's this frontier as well of predicting what could happen, predicting what could
Mhm.
come. But maybe to start with the fundamentals, since that's one of our themes already in this conversation, so important within stores. How does something like a shelf digitization technology or platform, what's the role that that has in unlocking decision making that's accurate and precise, both within some of the functions you've overseen as well as across the organization?
Yeah, Caitlin, it's worth saying that Brooks, who you and I both know very well, Brooks spent a significant amount of energy and time convincing me that Simbi was a better answer than anything I had ever worked with before. And it's good to know when you're wrong, Caitlin. I and Brooks will laugh. He and I have laughed about this before, but I spent a lot of time telling Brooks, I worked at Amazon. Like they're spending billions of dollars on this thing called Just Walk Out. You are not going to do this with robots. And of course, he's now laughing because I was totally wrong. And Amazon's walk back, just walk out, and Simbi is thriving. And here you and I are talking. So I became a believer. And look, there's Brooks right there. And thank you, Brooks. Appreciate your patience with me. I think going back to your question, Caitlin, I think you can do a lot of things to infer what's happening at the shelf. And there are a lot of ways that folks have tried to get that inference to be better, but nobody's really figured it out. And I think what Simbi has done with giving you not just visibility to what's happening in the shelf, but also I would give huge kudos to just partnering with the great organizations that they partnered with. And I say that intentionally, Caitlin, because there are a lot of technology companies that don't do a great job of partnering. Simbi does a phenomenal job. In fact, they are the best of anybody that I've worked with in terms of really partnering and trying to understand what are you trying to do and how do I help? This is a tool. It's a way to help you do your job better. That's really what Simbi brings. And we talked about cleaning up data. A lot of things where you can use technology to clean up data. Think about the item file as an example. Everybody's got, I don't want to say everybody, but most retailers have very similar things that they want to know about the item file. Well, a lot of retailers compete with each other, so they're not going to share that information with each other. But there are ways to leverage technology to be able to check many, many different characteristics across many, many items and get it cleaned up without having to have, people go and do it, right? By the way, it's also mind-numbing work. I haven't met anybody that actually likes doing that work. So I think that's a good one for technology to help on. But if you look at the shelf, there isn't any source of information. There was that inference. But even if I know that I have perpetuals, so perpetuals been around since, I don't know, Caitlin, like early 90s, I don't know when they first came about. They've been around for a while, right? Well, you might have three locations in your average retail store, right? You're going to have the shelf. You might have an area above the shelf, depending on what you're talking about. And then you're likely to have it at least one place in the back room. And uh, and so just knowing what the perpetual is, which has its own issue with the accuracy, doesn't tell you what really matters to the customer, which is what's on the shelf. And so I know I'm saying things that folks at Simbi know really well, but I think that digitizing kind of the last frontier, the toughest part to get to, is where Simbi really broke through. But I think the other part that I would give huge kudos for was it just worked, which is crazy to say. There are a lot of hopes and dreams of technology that people talk about, but when it got turned on, you go put a robot into a store, you could pull up you could pull up the multi-store view or the store view. You go see what the map of the store looks like, and it works, which is crazy because there's so many things that don't work. And so I know there are a lot of folks that, all of my experience at Simbi came at SpartanNash initially, Caitlin. That's where I really got exposure to it. There were great folks at SpartanNash that are working their tails off to partner with folks at Simbi to go do it. So I'm not saying it was magic. I know it took a lot of hard work from folks. But you got to have great partners that you're going to work with. You got to have great people that are going to be patient and listen and want to work with you. And you got to have reliable technology that's going to deliver results. And those things, I think Simpi has focused on. It's clear they've focused on it. And I think you're seeing, to me, the commercial success that you're having is not surprising to me at all, because it's very authentic and genuine. It's not a sales pitch. It's not smoke and mirrors. It is actually partnering with folks and figuring out how to make their businesses better.
Well, those are very kind words, Bennett. And I think I probably speak as well for Brooks when I say thank you. He can't speak audibly, at least at this point, but we are so grateful for those kind words. And I think you're hitting on a quite important concept. Up until this point, retail's data desert has been inside of the store. We've known when product arrives and when it leaves, but that when that shopper is at the shelf, or when the shopper is at the shelf deciding what to buy, we don't always know what's at the stimulating that point of decision. And when the shopper is at home, looking at online inventory, there's often not trust of what's being seen because of the amount of substitutions and not founds that exist, which is really just a reflection of the fact that we can do a better job within retail understanding item location. So I think the concept you're teasing out of like this new shelf edge is a really important one. And as data becomes richer and more connected, and this awareness is being raised about the importance of the shelf and our understanding of it, I expect we'll see a lot of cascading implications and changes as a result, many of which you've led in prior roles, and I expect will continue to lead. I think related to what I just said, I am curious. You've led merchandising teams in so many impressive places. How do you believe that an intelligent shelf will change merchandising in the short term and also maybe a little bit farther out?
Yeah. Well, I think it is a major part of what the future of merchandising and related marketing will be. Caitlin, just to kind of pick on those two together. I think marketing is kind of run ahead a little bit, where marketing, really is a lot less about, think about sort of promotions as an example. It's a lot less about which promotions do I run and how effective are they. A lot of that has become commoditized actually. And a lot of the things that are happening in marketing now as a result of technology, it's really a marketing tech problem or a MarTech problem, right? What are all the different technologies that you have and how do you pipe them together? It's almost like you need a CIO to do it rather than a marketer. So I think on that side, I think the tech has sort of pushed it further along than where you are in merchandising. And part of it is because you've got, merchants that in retailers are driving a big part of the P&L. And so I think folks are understandably a little bit sensitive about, well, yeah, but is the technology really going to be able to help us, or am I willing to take the leap on making some changes with technology? So I'll pick on one. So let's pick bigger rocks. Pick something like assortment, right? You could look at somebody like Alibaba, right? Alibaba has automated assortment with computers 10 years ago, if not more, right? So it's been around for a long time. Amazon was not the first person to do that. Alibaba was far ahead of them in terms of what they were doing. But if you think about that kind of re-envisioning around what the merchant of the future is, I think it's similar to what we talked about when we said, hey, there was work that's going on wherever it's happening. And the store, I think, is the easiest place to understand where it's happening. There are things that are either not particularly fun to do or not particularly value added from a customer perspective, or maybe they're just too time consuming to really deserve the amount of resource that you would need to throw at it. And I think those are places where we see technology really playing a big role and helping sort of along that journey where you would say, well, if I've got associates in a store, what's the best use for those associates in the store? Well, engaging with the customers. I think most of us, hopefully, that wouldn't be that hotly debated, right? And so if they're doing things like digging through banana boxes trying to find product in a grocery store, not a super good use of time. There are some folks I've met that like doing that, but I think in large part, I think a lot of those folks don't enjoy doing that work as much, right? I think they'd rather engage with the customers, and I think the customers in many cases would prefer that too. I think you're seeing the same thing happen, and of course, Simbi has disrupted that dramatically, right? Whether it is prices, finding inventory, knowing what are the products on the shelf, helping you prioritize which ones are the biggest issues, and focusing your work there. Things that people have tried to do over time, but Simbi really took kind of a step change in terms of the ability of folks in the store to be able to deploy it. But then you think about on the merchandising side, well, do I want merchants triaging a bunch of sort of short-term problems that may not be the best use of time for folks in the center? Probably not, as an example, right? And Brooks and I had talked a lot about, well, we've got these dashboards that we can create for the merchants, and we've taken great strides in terms of how do I make that really accessible to them at their fingertips, very easy to get into. And then you started talking about how do we then prompt them and help them identify what the top issues are. And you talked about sort of getting ahead of the curve. Those are places where you can start taking the digital shelf, which is, of course, captured was it's Caitlin, it's still 3 times a day, isn't it? Most folks do 3 times a day. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
beautiful.
you get those snapshots, but if you've got, 100 units or 200 stores that you're running across, your ability to go pull up one by one, you probably shouldn't be doing that, right? I mean, you might need to for a specific reason, but what you really want to do is you want to say, hey, I got patterns here that are helping me identify other issues that maybe I didn't know about, right? And there might be an issue with a pick slot in a warehouse, as an example, right? But I can actually use that data to help me identify that, look, I got this issue across a number of different stores that are pulling out of this DC. Those are things that are much higher value add because now if I fix that problem, then I fixed a bunch of problems across a number of stores. So I think that's where you're starting to see on the merchant side, you're starting to see them move from, I'd say, more firefighting and more dealing with a lot of issues. And I think this probably, you look at the more sophisticated retailers, I think they probably index a little bit higher on having moved away from that over the past, call it 5 years. Whereas you see a lot of folks that have not moved away from that and are trying to figure it out, right? Regional retailers, as an example, there are folks like Schnucks that are pretty far ahead in terms of how they use technology, but there are a lot of folks that are not, and so I think they're trying to figure out how to catch up. So I think you're seeing the merchants where you really want them doing is you want them saying, "Where's the puck going?" I live in Michigan, and I'm a hockey guy, so I hope folks can forgive the hockey analogy. But where is the puck going, right? I think a lot of folks say, "Where's the puck going?" Right? And the game of hockey, it's not about where the puck is right now. That's not how you win a hockey game. You got to know where the puck is going to be. And I can't remember what Wayne Gretzky's famous quote on this was, but Wayne Gretzky basically had a quote like that about what made him such a great player. And so that's really where you want to get the merchants to, which is thinking about where the customer is going to be 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. I've got a lot of big vendors that I'm working with that we're trying to figure out how to create winning strategies with. How do I go partner with them to be able to go activate that and get ahead of it in terms of how we plan and grow the business together rather than dealing with a lot of the kind of firefighting things that are never going to go away. They're complex supply chains, right? But you got to figure out how to leverage technology to free you up from that to make the things that are sort of, every day a little bit easier so that you can focus on longer term.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very clear, what you're talking about, Bennett. And I think two questions are coming to mind based upon some of the things you just said. When shelves become intelligent and dynamic
Mhm.
with things like digitization, Bennett, what happens? Like, are we headed towards an era where our bots are ordering our groceries for us and looking at our fridges and making recipes? That might be in a far out example. And then in that world, and obviously that was a fairly future forward looking view, but how do in an era of a digitized shelf, how does the relationship between the people in retail start to evolve? In terms of corporate to store, store team to shopper, partner to retailer, whatever it is. What does that ripple effect look like from a human perspective as well?
Yeah, Kayla, I actually, as you asked that question, I was thinking about other questions you've asked over time and whether I did a good job of answering them or not. And you actually asked this question about centralization versus localization. Um, I'll go back to the HEB example. One of the things, and I'll come back. Give me a second, Caitlin.
Please.
Um, One of the things that makes them really good at what they do and really tough to compete with is that they give authority to the local store operators to be able to tailor and win those individual communities. They are very, very good at that, and they've designed their systems to be able to do that. I say systems, I don't necessarily mean technology. Yes, technology, but I mean like the way that they work. They've
Yes.
designed it to do that, right? It's in their culture, it's in their DNA, it's the way that they work, right? If you tried to do that at most retailers, it would be chaos. To just go and say, hey, well, you just do kind of whatever you want out in these stores, that's generally not going to be a good idea, right? So I think when you think about technology and you think about how technology enables you to be able to tap into that expertise and that closeness to the community that these individual stores are working in, that's really where I think you can unlock. So if you've got the shelf digitized, I know that a planogram is being executed the way that it was intended, right? Which, by the way, that planogram may not be the right planogram for that community in that store. But let's just say I at least know the planogram is being executed the way that we had planned it. I know that that product is in stock on the shelf. I've got reliable signals on it, and we're now tuning our process and all of our systems to be able to deliver that in a high confidence way every single day. Then I think you start getting a lot better at, well, I now know when I call a play, I know that play is going to go the way that I wanted it to go, right? Now you can start thinking about, well, yeah, but you have this planogram. Does that planogram really fit for this community that I'm in? Maybe not. Maybe you're carrying some brands that I don't need to carry. Maybe you're carrying assortment you don't need to carry. Maybe you're carrying price points that we don't need to carry, right?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the magic of where you get to, the folks that are in those communities, that are in those stores. I think giving them more control and more ability to influence what ends up happening is where I think there is real power. Because the communities are not alike, they're not the same. And of course, if you tried to do, and we all know this, but if you try to do a planogram for each individual location that you have, depending on how many locations you have, that is a significant amount of work. So if you can find a way to have technology help you go do that, then I think you're in a different place. The other thing I would say, Caitlin, is if the digitized shelf can allow you to have high confidence in that play getting executed the way that you had intended it to be executed, that also goes a long way with your vendor partners.
Yeah.
So look, they want to partner with retailers that are good at executing, not surprising, that are good at executing. So I think if you've got that confidence, that level of insight that you can bring to say, hey, we know how to execute this really well. We're going to start tailoring some of these things that are happening out in these communities. I think the brands have a much higher confidence that you're doing that in a data-driven way, that you would actually be able to execute it. and that you're able to get the feedback from the folks that are in the stores. So, you could call, I don't know if you call it, stores as merchants, and you'll have a spectrum of that, right? You'll have some folks that love stuff like that. You'll have some folks that maybe love it less, right? And so some of it, I think, depends on your culture and what the folks out in the stores kind of look like and what they gravitate toward. But at the end of the day, if you can win those communities, that is the way that you win retail. So maybe that's an old school perspective on it, Caitlin. But even if I layer on omni-channel and we said, hey, you're now going to be shopping on your couch rather than in the store, well, you're shopping on your couch somewhere, right? And that somewhere is part of a community, right? And so I think the answer, while you might not be shopping physically in the store, the answer is the same, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how do I make sure that what the offer that I'm building and the things I'm thinking about really make sense for you as an individual customer.
So many things out there that I want to respond to, Bennett. And what I love is that you actually brought us full circle to the beginning too, where you're talking about how do you win the hearts and minds of the shopper, right? That's why retail exists. And a lot of what you said was actually reiterated by some of the chat commentary from Dave Steck a few moments ago around how retailers can use the power of their supply chain and distribution to find a way to get greater assortment choice to customers with things like shelf digitization. So I think you're in, plus one in company is maybe what I'm trying to say. You also, so you hit on a couple things I'd like to touch on briefly before we wrap up. But one was this concept of, shall I call it, a converging retail operating model, right? And you've managed many aspects of retail. You've managed merchandising, supply chain, ops, and I'm curious, as we use technology to better serve the humans, to better empower our processes, what are the biggest cultural or structural barriers that you have experienced, whether as an operator or see as an advisor, that prevent alignment to create that new retail operating model that better serves its people, whether it's empowering the store teams, doing your jobs better at corporate, or serving the shopper best? And then is there a role for technology, and if so, what is it, to unify that operating rhythm? So the barriers, and then what's the role of technology to unify?
Yeah, barriers, I think some of the main drivers of the barriers have to do with what the incentives are or how folks are measured. And so some of that's a leadership challenge to figure out how you navigate it. Because you think about something like supply chain, where traditionally supply chain is a cost center. And so my goal is to get my cost per case down, as an example. And there are lots of ways to do that that may not drive positive enterprise value. They might make the supply chain P&L look better, but they won't necessarily make the enterprise P&L look better. So I think the best retailers have been ahead of that curve, where they've been thinking about how do we link that from an enterprise value perspective. I can tell you kind of, if you just go old school for a second. You can tell I like the old school stuff, Caitlin. So you go old school for a second. Supply chain was doing time and motion studies, right? Kind of like manufacturing, right? So you think about kind of the old legends of Japanese manufacturing, which, they're still obviously very proficient at manufacturing, but a lot of those concepts that we took sort of across industries, right? And supply chain in retail was one of them, where people would go do time and motion studies. They got a lot sharper about how do I get more efficient in a box. Well, that then went to retail, and retailers started doing the same thing, right? They started going, how do I get time and motion studies? How do I put those into stores? How do I get a lot smarter about boxes, touches, steps? Just get smarter and more deliberate about how I work. Once you can measure those things, Caitlin, then it starts to become a little bit of a math problem, right? Because you're going and saying, okay, well, let's take something like breakdown and sort as an example.
Mhm.
When I get a truckload of product into a store, and then somebody at the store has to go take it off the truck, go sort it in the aisles that it goes into, go spot it. They all have different processes, right? But you stick it on a U-boat, you go put it in front of the shelf, and then we're going to go stock this thing, spot it in front of the shelf. Um, well, we could go to supply chain and say, what if you reoriented the product in supply chain? And when it gets to the store, they're gonna have to do less sorting. That could save time. Now, that might cost you money in supply chain, but it might save you money in stores, right? Or let's take the inverse. The supply chain might want to do pallet driven, right? Even merch might want to do pallet driven. But when you get into the stores, I might be dealing with a bunch of excess inventory if you do pallet driven. And then I've got costs in the store. So you got to be thinking about that enterprise value. So I think you're talking about different incentives and different ways of measuring these parts of the business that you have to pull together for enterprise value. And I think technology plays a huge role in that in terms of even think about the shelf, Caitlin. You talked about it, right? When I digitize the shelf, I can now measure things at the shelf that aren't really debatable, right?
Mhm.
Now I have information that's high confidence that I can then use to say to inform decisions that I'm going to make upstream, no matter what part of the business I'm in. And obviously, store operations and merchandising have been heavily involved with Simbi and the development of Simbi. But even on the supply chain side, I mean, those folks are more sort of logic and data driven than almost anybody in these retail companies, right? So I think it is a I think it fits well for bolting in that data and insight to help inform.
Where, Bennett, does that data and insight come into play in thinking about collaboration across the ecosystem, maybe outside of the retail organization with partners? And I think as I as I process too what you said, you're really pointing out again these very evergreen truisms that are truisms for a reason, where it boils down to what's in it for me, right?
Hmm.
Regardless of what my role is. So what is the how does increased shelf visibility and shelf intelligence empower retailers to better supply what's in it for me to their partners and have
Yeah.
better ability to serve internally and to the shoppers as well?
Yeah. Well, I think there are common ways of measuring at Simbi today when we think about things like price accuracy or we think about real availability for the customer, right? So I'm sort of linking some of the labor costs to it. The reason why I'm linking the labor costs to it is very specifically because if my supply chain budget, I'm just making the number up, right? If my supply chain budget is $100 million, right? And my store operations labor budget is $1 billion, right? I'm just making the numbers up, right? If I'm going to go to supply chain and I'm going to say, hey, I want you to spend 10 million more dollars, right? Then you know what the CEO is going to say, right? The CEO is going to say, okay, well, then how do we remove more than $10 million in the stores? Or how do I create more than $10 million in value in the stores? So that's the reason why I'm linking the two. So I think you could say, hey, if I tweak some things, if I change some things, then I've got some tests or use cases that allow me to measure with the digitized shelf what the impact I'm having to the consumer is. And I'd say by extension, I'm also understanding what the labor impact is, even if I didn't have store labor standards, because folks that are deploying Simbi are seeing that, right? That's part of the way that they measure the performance of Simbi. So I'm saying you are then linking that to the enterprise value calculation to say, look, nobody's going to say, I'm just going to go throw whatever, 10 million more dollars into my supply chain operation, right? They wouldn't do that. But you could say, I'm going to create more enterprise value, but you have to know what the levers are that you're going to use to create an enterprise value. So that's why I'm linking those two points.
Well, I don't know if anyone else feels motivated right now, Bennett, but I definitely do. So thank you for that. Um, Maybe just to close out with two final questions. I shared at the beginning that you have done us the incredible honor of joining our strategic advisory board at Simbi, and obviously you've mentioned as well you were a Simbi customer when at SpartanNash. I I am curious. You've worked with some of the largest and the most respected companies in the world, Bennett, and you still do. What prompted you to decide to join us as a strategic advisor? And, as you look forward related to that, where do you see the impact of this technology that we're bringing to bear together taking shape?
Yeah. I think I referred to it a little bit earlier, Caitlin. Um, at the end of the day, I think I just want to work with great people. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think many folks are looking for that, right? We're not always going to agree. We're not always going to see things the same way. In fact, I love the variety of perspectives and folks that bring different experiences to the table. But you want to work with great people that are passionate about what they do. And I think you also want to work with folks that are really partners in terms of how they work. And you talked a lot about the ecosystem and kind of interdependencies and sort of acknowledging Simbi plays in this space. And it's true in any industry with any company, by the way. There are very few that are isolated. It's just getting more and more interdependent in terms of how it works. So I think that partnering aspect is really important to me too. And then I think maybe I could say conviction that comes with it. And I told you the story about Brooks and the patience that he had. And you know, look, we had some tough conversations, but Brooks knew how good it was. He knew how good his company was. He knew how good the people were. And whether it's Brooks or whether it's Ben or whether it's you, Caitlin, or Brad, right? I mean, everybody I've come across at Simbi has been that. And I think it is a very unique, it's just a very unique place, a very unique group of people, a very unique opportunity, and I think moment in time. And I think retail, when we talk about retail and the use case of digitizing the shelf and what we could do with that. So we're talking about the most important part of the customer interaction that we have, right? That we can't really measure today. And Simbi's bringing that to bear and doing it in a way with I mean, anybody, I don't want to say anybody, but other folks could build robots, right? That's not really what Simbi's trying to do. Yeah, robots are there, but that's not the point of what Simbi is trying to do. So I think that's why I wanted to be part of this. I want to work with great people that are passionate about what they do, have real conviction, and are partnering with these great organizations to go improve their performance. But at the end of the day, all of this leads to a better customer outcome. And so, yeah, you got to make money and you got to grow top line. And everybody has objectives they have to go hit. But at the end of the day, this is making the customer experience better. It's making the associate experience better. And it's making these businesses better. And that makes me happy. So it's been a great privilege, Caitlin, and been a great privilege to get to know you and other folks at Simbi, and yeah, it's just been a heck of a lot of fun, and I love being on this advisory board with you.
Well, it's so kind and very, very much mirrors exactly how we feel. So thank you for being so eloquent in describing it. There's elevating the retail experience. It touches most people on the planet. There's much there to be excited about together. And Benny, you just bring so much value to every interaction and so much strategic thought. So the feeling is very mutual, and we're deeply appreciative. Maybe as we wrap up with a final question, we've touched on an amazing number of topics today together, Bennett, and we'll soon share this recording with those with others in the industry. And I'm curious if you were able to leave the listeners, our audience, with one piece of advice, call to action, maybe something you're mulling over right now, whether it's for 2026 or beyond. What would that be?
Uh, can I make another reference, Caitlin? Look, it's good to know that you've been very fortunate to work with terrific people in your life and in your career. And I am incredibly fortunate and lucky to have had that. So I talked about Roxanne earlier as one person in my past that just I learned a ton from, and she's a phenomenal leader. And it's just been a great just been really special to be able to experience that. I'm gonna mention another one. So there was her name's Judith McKenna. She ran Walmart International at the time when I worked in Walmart China. And I remember she came and did like a small little like fireside chat with maybe, I don't know, 20 VPs or something like that. It was this very small, kind of intimate session, not recorded, not published or anything, just a very sort of direct, candid, ask whatever you want conversation. And I remember somebody asked her a question. They said, Judith, what do you think makes Walmart special? And Judith's been around Walmart for a while. I don't know how long she worked at Walmart. She said, I think it's our humanity. And maybe that seems odd to be in a SIMB call where, we could easily say, well, this is, related heavily to technology, and we talked a lot about how does technology linked to, customers and to associates and to business value. But I think that humanity I think that's what gets people out of bed every morning and wants them to be a part of something. And I never forgot what Judas said back then. And so I'm not trying to take a Walmart playbook and just, cram it down everybody's throat, but I love that answer. And so yeah, there are a lot of things you could say, hey, get smarter on AI and read up on AI, right? Don't just focus on technology deployment, and you got to focus on the hard work around process, right? And how you're going to organize teams to really be able to take advantage of it. Don't just focus on cutting and saving cost. Also focus on how you're going to augment and make the work better, like we talked about before. But I think the other thing, and we talked about customer focus, never lose the customer focus. Sam Walton talked about it. You have to be laser focused on the customer. That will never change. But I think the humanity is the point I would say around take that part of your heart that we all have that really, kind of motivates you and gets you out of bed every day, and bring that. And I think if we all can do a better job of that every day, then I think a lot of good things happen. So maybe now it sounds like I'm trying to run for a political office or something. I don't know, but I get older, Caitlin. Maybe I'm not wiser. I don't know, but that's one of the things that occurred to me that I think really does make a difference.
It definitely felt wise to me, and I think that topic of humanity has been a through line through this conversation. So it's a perfect ending note, Bennett. Thank you for that. Thank you too for the time. This has been so fascinating and educational, and we just are in your debt. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. See you next time.